Let's talk about bullying. We all think we know what it looks like, right? But what if the whole tough guy act, all that aggression we see, is just a mask for something way, way deeper? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the hidden psychology behind it all, based on what the research actually tells us. So, let's get into it. Just for a second, what's the first image that pops into your head? Is it some super confident, powerful person who's just got it all figured out? Maybe a popular leader who's always in control? Okay, hold on to that image, because we are about to completely tear it down. All right, first up, we have to deconstruct the myth. The stereotype of the bully is honestly one of the biggest things getting in the way of us understanding and actually fixing the real problem. And this is where everything gets flipped upside down. The myth says this is a person acting from a place of strength, but the psychological reality? It's the exact opposite. Researchers tell us that this behavior is often just a desperate performance to hide some really deep insecurity, shame, and a profound fear of being seen as, just ordinary or not good enough. So, if it's not about confidence, what is actually going on inside their head? This is where we get to the real heart of the issue. This quote just nails it. Confidence inverted. The aggression we see isn't some overflow of self-esteem. It's a defense mechanism. They're trying to protect a fragile inner world that feels like it could shatter at any moment. They control other people because they don't know how to control themselves yet. One of the main tools they use is something called projection. A bully feels threatened or maybe envious of someone's talent, their integrity, or how much people like them. So to deal with that awful feeling, they just project their own feelings of incompetence or shame onto that person. They're basically attacking a reflection of themselves in somebody else. So the key takeaway here is that this whole behavior is driven by a deeply insecure core. The target often becomes what's called a painful mirror, reflecting everything the bully is afraid they are not. This triggers this nasty thing called malicious envy, and the act of tearing that person down gives them a temporary but really intoxicating power fix. And you can hear that power fix right here in the words of Sophia, a former bully. That feeling of dominance, of power, of having your friends back you up, it's a short-term ego boost. It's a way to temporarily quiet those feelings of powerlessness that might come from a really unstable home life or just deep emotional turmoil. But that fix, it disappears fast. As another former bully, Joanna, shares, what's left is often a lifetime of guilt and shame. The act might bring a moment of relief, but in the long run, it just reinforces a negative self-image. It traps them in this cycle of repression that can lead to depression and all sorts of mental health struggles down the line. Okay, now let's zoom out and see how this goes from one person's actions to a full-on group phenomenon. Because bullying almost never happens in a vacuum. The second a group gets involved, the entire dynamic changes. This happens because of this really powerful psychological state called de-individuation. Basically, when we're in a crowd, we can feel anonymous, and our sense of personal accountability just kind of melts away. All of a sudden, the group's vibe becomes the new normal, and our own personal restraint can just go right out the window. And this whole process usually follows a pretty predictable script, as you can see here. It starts when a leader picks a target, creating a common enemy. This gives a dysfunctional group a twisted sense of purpose. Then the other members fall in line, usually out of a very real fear of being kicked out or becoming the next target themselves. And finally, as the mob gets bigger, responsibility gets spread so thin that no one person feels accountable anymore. The psychologist Albert Bandura had a name for this: moral disengagement. Which brings us to what might be the most critical role in this whole mess: the bystander. Because a bully can't keep doing what they're doing without an ecosystem that allows it. This quote is just so incredibly powerful. It totally reframes the bystander. You're not a neutral observer, you're an active participant. Most people who see bullying don't step in, not because they're mean, but because they're scared for themselves. But that silence has a massive impact. Because silence sends a very loud and clear message. What's happening here is acceptable. It literally nourishes the bad behavior, letting it continue and even grow. Pretending you don't see it is a form of collective denial that protects you, the individual, but allows the harm to go on. And that harm creates lasting scars, not just for the person being targeted, but for everyone caught up in the system. And this is not just a problem for kids on the playground. A poll found that nearly 1/3, 31% of American adults say they've been bullied. That number is just staggering. It's about the same rate as you see in teenagers, which proves this isn't just a childhood problem. It's a massive issue that follows us right into our careers and adult lives. And the damage is symmetrical. Victims, of course, can suffer from anxiety, social withdrawal, even symptoms of PTSD. But the bully is also getting hurt. The constant burying of guilt can lead to depression, suicidal thoughts, and a higher risk of developing antisocial personality disorder as an adult. They can get trapped in what's called a repetition compulsion, this unconscious need to repeat the harmful behavior over and over, always looking for a new victim to temporarily quiet their own self-hatred. This concept map from a study shows just how serious the impact is. Victimization is not a rite of passage. Researchers are more and more clear that it should be treated as a form of interpersonal trauma. It leads directly to clinical symptoms, things like being constantly on edge, avoiding people, and intense emotional pain that can stick around for years. So where does all this leave us? I mean, understanding the psychology is one thing, but figuring out our own role in the system, that's a whole other ballgame. This classic quote really points to a deeper truth about how we're all connected. It suggests that what happens to one of us, in some way, really happens to all of us. This idea is captured in things like the theory of unity, which basically says that we are all fundamentally connected. You can think of it like ripples in a pond. Our choices and our actions, they don't just affect us. They spread out and they impact the entire system. And when we look at bullying through that lens, we see it's not really about a bad person, but about a series of breakdowns in connection. The bully is acting out of shame. The mob is acting out of a fear of being excluded. The bystander is silent because they're afraid of getting involved. And the victim is left to suffer from the illusion that they are completely alone. Each role is just a symptom of a fractured system. And that leaves us with a final and pretty challenging question. If our well-being is all tied together and our silence can be a brick in the wall that protects the aggressor, then where does individual responsibility end and where does our collective responsibility begin? That's a question worth thinking about.